계속되는 전쟁으로 전 세계가 안보 위협에 흔들리고 있는 가운데 신흥 방산 강국으로 부상한 대한민국이 이제는 세계의 중심으로 강력한 영향력을 행사하고 있습니다. 미국 순위 조사 전문 매체 US 뉴스 앤드 월드 리포트는 매년 각 국가가 지닌 정치, 경제, 군사적 영향력을 종합하여 가장 강력한 국가 순위를 발표하고 있는데요. 그런데 얼마 전 발표된 새로운 순위에서 대한민국이 미국, 중국, 러시아, 독일, 영국에 이어 6위를 차지하는 놀라운 이변이 벌어졌습니다. 일본은 한국보다 2단계 낮은 8위를 기록했죠. 한국을 아시아의 약소국이라 우습게 생각했던 유럽에서도 한국의 놀라운 영향력에 큰 충격을 받았는지 얼마 전 영국의 저명한 군사 국제 정치 전문가 사이먼 휘슬러가 한국이 어떻게 국제 정세를 뒤흔드는 중추적인 국가로 부상하게 되었는지 분석하는 영상을 올려 큰 화제가 되고 있습니다. 영상을 함께 살펴보며 대한민국이 세계의 중심에 우뚝 설 수 있었던 이유를 알아보도록 하겠습니다.
And one that's beginning to punch way above its own weight, and that's South Korea. Geographically tiny, stuck on the end of a peninsula, and staring down not only a hostile northward neighbor, but the entire Chinese dragon on its flank, South Korea is not the place you'd expect to change the entire global balance. It's nestled under the protective umbrella of the United States, it lives under constant threat of attack, and at times it can't even get along with its other local neighbors. But that's not South Korea's whole story. So in today's episode of Warographics, we're going to take a deep dive into the changing nature of South Korea, its growing role as a leader among the world's regional powers, its increasing military strength and prowess, and its potential to be the linchpin that brings NATO, the United States, and the nations of the Pacific Rim into perfect harmony. Unless you've really kept up to date on your foreign policy, there's one term you might not have thought of, and that's arms dealer. Since the early 2010s, South Korea has aggressively pursued a policy to ramp up its ability to manufacture and export weapons, and with immediate effect. Over the last decade or so, arms sales have skyrocketed in South Korea, climbing to recognition as the world's 9th largest arms exporter between 2018 and 2022. But even that's not the end goal. South Korea aims to be in the top 4 global arms suppliers in the next few years, alongside Russia, France, and the United States. And the arms supply progress that South Korea has made during the Yoon administration has been exponential.
우크라이나 전쟁과 이스라엘 전쟁이 연달아 터지며 안보에 대한 불안감이 높아지자 전 세계에서 군비 증강 레이스가 시작되었고 덕분에 한국의 막강한 재래식 무기 생산 능력이 큰 주목을 받게 되었습니다. 지난 2022년부터 폴란드와 사우디를 비롯한 유럽, 중동, 동남아 국가들과 대규모 방산 계약을 연달아 체결하며 방산 수출 최고 기록을 하루가 멀다 하고 갱신해 나갔고 덕분에 올해 이스라엘, 영국, 스페인 등을 제치고 방산 수출 5위권으로 올라설 것으로 예상되고 있습니다. 그런데 사이먼은 이 같은 한국의 방산 수출 전략이 단순히 외화를 벌기 위한 것이 아닌 혼란한 국제 상황에서 살아남기 위한 놀라운 전략이었다는 분석을 내놓았는데요.
Domestically, South Korea has further signaled its turn toward military readiness. Its 2023 Armed Forces Day parade featured the largest military march in a decade, featuring troops, tanks, drones, and ballistic missiles. And finally, it's become clear in recent years that South Korea's ambitions extend far past its current manufacturing capabilities. In July of 2022, South Korea performed its first test flight of the KF-21 Boromai, a joint venture with Indonesia that will provide an advanced, stealthy, fourth-generation fighter that should be in production by 2026. Like its current projects, the KF-21 will be a far more affordable option than what's available from, say, the United States in the form of the F-35 Lightning II, while providing all the wartime capability that most nations could ever want. On the high seas, South Korea is making strides in advanced destroyer and frigate technology and contemplating the production of nuclear-powered submarines. Equally major is South Korea's exploration toward building strategic military transport aircraft, possibly with the capacity to serve as a drone-carrying mothership. Taken together, these new developments suggest that South Korea's current defense posture isn't meant to be a short-term deterrent or a political flight of fancy. It's an effort to establish a new status quo. But it all leads to a broader question. Why? And why now? As Kim Jae-yop, senior researcher of the Sung-Kyon Institute for Global Strategy, put it when speaking with Breaking Defense, to quote, "Surrounded by hostile and formidable military powers like North Korea, China, and Japan, South Korea is required to maintain an indomitable defense posture." That is to say, South Korea is surrounded by powerful and potentially hostile nations and believes that in order to maintain its sovereignty, it's got to make clear that it is not going to be messed with. Kim continued, quote, "This has led to Seoul's defense industry developing and manufacturing technically reliable weapons and utilizing the country's own world-class industrial bases like shipbuilding, electronics, automobiles, machinery, etc." The quote ends. It's not hard to see why South Korea might consider these defense concerns paramount to its own survival. South Korea is threatened by an overtly aggressive northern neighbor. It shares the Yellow Sea with a rapidly militarizing and highly ambitious rising superpower, and it's a close US ally. South Korea would not only be expected to act in the event of a Chinese attack on Taiwan, but it's got to prepare for the possibility that China would expect South Korea to intervene and try to preempt that by unleashing North Korea on the South at the same time. And finally, South Korea, as a regional power backed up by a global superpower, has had to watch firsthand over the last few years and learn a hard lesson that other nations in its position have also had to understand. A major power ally, be it America, Russia, China, or the European Union, might be bound by treaty to come to a regional power's defense, but that does not mean they will. In South Korea's case, it's also got to contend with the fact that its superpower partner is often at the whims of whatever political party is in charge, and that an ironclad defense agreement made with one administration could very easily be thrown out by the next. So South Korea, like Poland, Saudi Arabia, and other regional powers, has decided to ensure its own defense regardless of whether or not the US or its other allies actually show up for it in a crisis. On the other, it's meant ensuring that other close allies of the United States, from Australia to Saudi Arabia to the European nations of NATO, are willing to advocate for South Korea if ever they need to.
우크라이나와 이스라엘 전쟁을 지켜보며 우리는 미국이 한국을 위해 대신 피를 흘려줄 거라고 기대할 수 없다는 사실을 깨닫게 되었고, 유럽마저 능가하게 된 강력한 방산 능력을 토대로 스스로를 지킬 힘을 기르기 시작했습니다. 그리고 두 번째로 준비한 전략은 전 세계의 무기 공급국으로 자리 잡아 동맹국들이 한국의 전쟁이 일어나더라도 외면할 수 없게 만드는 것이었는데요. 그런데 이러한 전략이 성립하기 위해선 한 가지 조건이 먼저 선행되어야 합니다. 바로 한국이 전 세계에 무기를 공급할 수 있을 정도의 생산 능력을 갖추고 있어야 한다는 것이죠. 그리고 지난 몇 년 동안 한국은 그러고도 남을 능력이 있다는 사실을 결과를 통해 증명해냈습니다.
In Poland, the first batch of 10 K2 tanks and 24 K9 self-propelled howitzers arrived just 4 months after Poland finalized its purchase with South Korea, and it got its first Fa-50 fighter aircraft after just 10 months. That is a very rare feat among global arms suppliers. Just take Germany, who finalized a contract to deliver 44 Leopard tanks to Hungary in 2018, but only delivered the first unit in August of 2023. But this ability to produce mass amounts of weaponry on short notice isn't just good for exports. Those South Korean production lines are producing South Korean weapons, ones that South Korea's own military is adept at using. In fact, South Korea appears to be highly confident in its ability to rapidly produce its own new hardware, as evidenced by the fact that the South Korean government will frequently postpone its own weapons orders so that the manufacturing industry can build more products for export. Put simply, that is not something a nation does when it's surrounded by hostile neighbors. South Korea's willingness to take the risk anyway is a clear indicator that the country believes it could make up a domestic shortfall in record time. The South Korean military is already quite robust. It's got well over 1,000 modern main battle tanks, over 10,000 armored cars, several thousand self-propelled howitzers, robust air defense capabilities, including 8 Patriot missile batteries, several hundred 4th and 5th generation fighter jets, and a sophisticated fleet that's well on its way to becoming a true blue water navy. The country's policy of mandatory military service ensures that it can leverage several million reservists, and from a cultural perspective, large swaths of South Korea's population are more than willing to fight in defense of their own sovereignty. South Korea's 2023 manufacturing capabilities put it above most of the world in its ability to replenish equipment in real time. Just for comparison, if, say, Russia was able to produce new equipment at that rate, then the war in Ukraine would have probably ended a long time ago. Even the equipment that South Korea exports, the stuff it gives away, can have a massive benefit to South Korea itself. The advantage conferred here is one of arms dependency, that other countries that accept new military hardware produced by South Korea now rely on South Korea for the ability to maintain that hardware and acquire new kit. With that arms supply comes trade relations, closer diplomatic ties, and a vested interest by other world nations that South Korea can keep on manufacturing. Nobody wants to see South Korea end up in a war, especially on the wrong side of the outcome, because then all these cheap, high-quality armaments are just going to go away.
전 세계가 우크라이나에서 시작된 전쟁에 휘청이고 있지만 언제나 최악의 전쟁을 대비해왔었던 한국만이 위기 속에서 기회를 잡아내고 있습니다. 세계에서 손꼽히는 군사기술력과 무기 생산 능력, 무기를 아무리 많이 수출해도 국가 안보에 문제가 없을 것이란 강력한 군사력에 기반한 자신감, 한국을 최소한 친구의 친구로 여기게 만드는 우호적인 외교 정책 등 지난 수십 년 동안 쌓아온 수많은 요인들이 톱니바퀴처럼 맞물려 대한민국을 세계의 중심으로 밀어올리고 있습니다. 그리고 분석을 마친 사이먼은 앞으로 수십 년은 대한민국이 주인공인 시대가 찾아올 것이란 놀라운 결론을 내놓았는데요.
Since 2022, the nation has launched its first indigenously produced space rocket, completed test flights of the Boromar aircraft, announced several new arms production initiatives, completed several multi-billion-dollar deals. That's an incredible rate of progress, and it's entirely fair to be impressed, as defense experts around the world have been. South Korea's current posture is one that emphasizes the importance of being proactive. Give South Korea a few more years under these conditions, working at the pace that they have been, and it seems entirely likely that South Korea can become a global defense powerhouse for decades to come. South Korea's industrial capacity, its unique history and perspective, its geographical and geopolitical position all mean that it can be a pivotal influence in the decades to come. Now we'll sit back and watch the dominoes fall as the world adjusts to a new major player that it didn't see coming.
과연 사이먼의 분석대로 대한민국이 변화를 거듭하고 있는 국제 무대의 키플레이어로 거듭나게 될 수 있을까요? 세계의 주인공으로 부상할 대한민국의 찬란한 미래를 그려보며 새로운 소식으로 찾아뵙도록 하겠습니다. 끝까지 시청해주셔서 감사합니다. 도움이 되셨다면 좋아요를, 다른 이야기도 궁금하시면 구독을 눌러주세요.